Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Edge, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, and it is now a course at NYU and an elective towards the journalism certificate. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, and follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Edge, and today I am so happy to have Anna Medaris with us today. And I'm doing something which I haven't done before, and I'm really excited about it. It's going to be a live taped coaching session and to help her with some of the issues she's facing as a freelancer. So I just want to first tell you a little bit about her, and then I'll tell you how we connected. So Anna is a freelance health and lifestyle journalist with nearly 15 years of experience writing features, narratives, explainers, profiles, and news hits for publications, including The Washington Post, Business Insider, Cosmopolitan, Women's Health, U.S. News and World Report, Vox, Everyday Health, Monitor on Psychology, and others. She left staff jobs to go freelance full-time for the first time in June 2023. Anna is passionate about and skilled in telling sensitive human interest stories, from heartbreaking tales of maternal suicide to lighthearted exposés of runners' digestive issues, critiquing quirky cultural trends from White Claw to cold plunges to biological age tests, and answering questions you didn't know you had. What does, I'm going to say this wrong, skoliosexual mean? Can you cure an emotional hangover? Is resting bitch face real? Anna has appeared as a health expert and commentator on the Today Show, Good Morning America, Hulu's Age of Influence, and many local TV and radio stations. And she serves as a New York City chapter lead of the Association of Healthcare Journalists, the VP of Communications for the Deadline Club, which is the Society of Professional Journalists local chapter, and as a writing coach through the New York Writing Room. And as a proud University of Michigan alum, recreational triathlete, and beer enthusiast who lives in Brooklyn with her husband and basset hound, who is not her husband, Longbody. Anna, welcome. I'm so glad to have you here. And I love that you are a professional journalist and an editor and a writing coach, because you're somebody who is dealing with situations that have come up with the change in publishing. And you're not a newbie by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of my students and people I work with are not newbies and are dealing with things that they are facing that maybe they wouldn't have faced 5 or 10 years ago. So I want to just give everyone a little background. Anna reached out with a lovely email to Freelance Writing Direct, and she said, as I've gushed about on various social media platforms, your podcast has been a big inspiration since I unexpectedly transitioned to freelancing full-time last summer. And we saw in her bio, it was in 2023. One of my biggest revelations has been, I so much more identify as a writer, author, journalist than as a reporter or otherwise serious news junkie. In newsrooms, I kind of felt like I had to pretend to be a reporter. That was my role, after all. But I rarely geeked out over news. However, I have always geeked out over grammar, sentence structure, rhythm, and the actual writing process. I like reporting, but I love LOVE capital writing. I didn't find there was much room for these passions in my in-house roles. I was mostly able to scratch those itches freelancing part-time for magazines like Women's Health, Cosmo, and the Washington Post magazine. Over the years, I've been very involved with organizations like the National Press Club, the Association of Healthcare Journalists, and the Society of Professional Journalists, without realizing groups like the American Society of Journalists and Authors even exist until coming across your pod. Well, I'm so glad to be helping share information about ASJA, which I've been a member of since 1997. So I responded, "Hi, Anna. I deeply appreciate your shout outs on social media. I've been thinking I would love to have you as a guest on the podcast in a mini coaching session, hopefully the first of many I can offer on the podcast. We can talk about where you've been, where you want to go, including your recent revelations, and I can share some tips, tricks, and strategies based on my 3 decades on both sides of the publishing wall and as a teacher." So Anna asked me about specific areas that she wanted to cover. And so I'm going to read the first, and then you tell me if you want to expand on it. And then I'll kind of give you my impromptu coaching help on this. So, for what you'd like, you said how not to get bogged down with the meh assignments and save time to formulate and pitch my own ideas, even when the latter takes more time and is far less likely to actually turn into any income. Do you want to add anything to that, Anna?
Yeah, well, first, thanks so much for having me. It's great to talk to you, yeah, in a live or recorded session. And yeah, it's been fun to listen to your podcast and almost like find my people in that way, which, as a mid-career person, it's kind of funny that I'm just sort of discovering there's this overlap. I always sort of thought of reporters and journalists as kind of interchangeable, or I never really thought about it, frankly. And now it's like, oh, I'm not really a reporter. I'm a writer, I'm a journalist, and hopefully one day an author. But that's been really helpful, sort of a mental reframe for me, and to kind of continue to go down that rabbit hole a little bit and find those people who speak, my language and who I can learn from. But yeah, so when it comes to thinking about pitching versus getting assignments, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword where I've been really lucky. I think that most of my work in the past 10 months has been assigned. I haven't had to pitch. And I think a lot of freelancers want something like that, where their editors are coming to them and saying, here's an assignment. We need it by this time. Here's the fee. Here's the word count. Do you want it or not? And so that was great. And I was super lucky. And I think it's still the bulk of my stories. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I am 15 years in. I have a lot of contacts. I am somebody who loves keeping what psychologists call loose ties and having a big network. I don't have any problem going back to people that I haven't talked to in 10 years. I've never burned bridges. So that hasn't been awkward. It's been really helpful. But the downside is I'm also somebody who really loves pitching. I love, I got into this profession because I love story ideation. I love my own ideas and I love seeing them come to fruition. And pitching for me is it's fun. It gets back at that sort of initial, that spark in me of why I like doing this. And I also kind of love the sort of, which is something you don't really get in staff. At least I did it on a staff job, where I'm kind of every morning, ooh, maybe I'll get some exciting email that one of my pitches was accepted. And you don't kind of have that bit of risk in a newsroom, where I'm every morning I kind of knew what my day was going to look like. I mean, I didn't know what I was going to be writing about, but it wasn't this thrill of maybe not, something will get picked up. But that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, I would like to find more time to develop my pitches and actually land them. Whereas instead of just accepting assignments, which is very easy to do and hard to say no to, because it is money and I am essentially living paycheck to paycheck.
Okay. So I have kind of a three-pronged approach, is
Sure.
what I'm thinking. One is you've been bogged down by some of these assignments that you're doing. It's like your workaday stuff, but you need stuff that's going to get you excited, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things, and I talk about it in my book, is setting up Google alerts for
Mhm.
subjects that you are interested in writing about. So if you have some passions,
Mhm.
that's the best way to get yourself connected and excited about the material that you could then pitch. In between, obviously, you have to make a paycheck, but there's another approach that I want to suggest as well. When you're doing strict reported pieces, and that might be, again, what the publication needs, I always recommend that writers put in their voice. So, for example, if you're writing a straight health piece, you might want to start it with an anecdote, either about yourself or about somebody that you've interviewed that you can then show voice. You can then put your persona. I think it will make you more invested in the pieces and it will get you noticed. I'm all about getting noticed. And so that is one way to do that for those workaday assignments if you can. The
Yeah.
best place to do it is in the beginning of the piece or at the end of the piece. The middle part is where the editors want to have that very serviceable information, particularly when you're dealing with health.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if you set up the Google alerts and then you can really see what is coming out and what you can make timely. And
Mm.
to get an editor's attention, it's really important to go with the zeitgeist, to find something that is in the cultural commentary, to see something that's connected. It doesn't necessarily have to be with the news, but it has to be with something happening in the culture.
Right.
And if you're doing health assignments, it's kind of like when you start out as a reporter, they're giving you, in a newsroom, you're going to cover like the sanitation meeting, right? So how can you make that interesting? How do you make it interesting to you? You have to figure out a way that's not only going to make it interesting to you, but that will get you noticed. So maybe it's finding some kind of service-oriented bullet points that you're always gonna add to your pieces
Mm.
that's identifiable to you. So in my book, I have Estelle's Edge everywhere, and I use that in some of my writing as well. So maybe that's something you can always put in a sidebar, and that's like some perspective that you're doing. Maybe it's finding someone who's like very, very, very high profile in that particular area, or maybe you're interviewing an author. Each time it's something that you're going to put your stamp on. That's one thing that I think will excite you, and especially because you mentioned you want to be an author one day. And so that will start connecting you to that community.
Mm. That's really smart. I think part of that, we're speaking the same language. I actually have an assignment due today about foot pain from standing all day. And it's kind of like, fine, I can write that. I'm not like, this isn't a topic that I, stay up at night thinking about. Fortunately, my feet are fine. But I did think, for me and for the readers, I would like to start with a story about somebody in a profession who stands all day and there are issues with foot pain. So I did talk to a nurse yesterday who told me all about that. So I'm planning to use her as the lead. So I do think that that's a really helpful strategy because I'm always like, if I'm not excited to write it, they're not going to be excited to read it. And
Exactly. And also, what about a celebrity? Like I was
that,
thinking, celebrities are always
yeah,
dealing with wardrobe issues. Maybe Mindy Kaling wrote something about foot pain, standing. And then you have a way in to maybe do a write around, or you can talk to the celebrity, or you can talk to the publicist. And it just, I
yeah.
want you to start opening different doors for yourself and making different connections through your existing work, because you have to do your work, but you're going to make it fun and you're going
Yeah.
to build connections.
Yeah, that's really smart. So seeing the pieces that I'm just considering just get them in so that I can then get to the stuff that I want to write see
Right.
them as opportunities to make other connections.
Great. I want to go to your next thing. You said how not to get bogged down in day to day of just meeting the next deadline to think about and make time for long-term career goals. Again, when that doesn't immediately translate to a paycheck, and I am living paycheck to paycheck. Right. So I have a suggestion in my book on page 274 called Mapping Your Platform. And it's an exercise to help you meet your goals. So you go back to your mapping template, you find the section about you, you draw a line, and you write down everything you are doing to build and promote your work. All right, this is all going to be connected. Then you draw another line and write down your goals, such as getting into bigger publications, writing more essays, appearing on podcasts, starting a newsletter, writing a book, whatever your goal is. Then you circle any actions from step 2 that you can do quickly to promote your work. Posting on social media, sharing the content of someone else who has a lot of followers, writing a quick post. And then you put a square around any actions that will take more planning, like starting a newsletter on Substack, teaching a class, putting together a webinar, building a website. And then you break the squared actions into smaller steps. And I put it all in my book and circle those steps too. So for example, for teaching a class, those smaller steps might include researching how to write a syllabus, viewing class structures online, putting together an outline of what you would say, and researching places to teach. And then put a date in your calendar for each baby step. And each week, do one of the items you circled. Each time you look at your list, you'll remember who you are and what your goal is. And then in small incremental steps, and I am a believer in small incremental steps. I have a lot of long-term projects that I've started, including when I wrote the book, and I'm writing other books now. But I need to break everything down into the smallest baby steps because it's very hard to think of something in a very, very long term. So to break it down into steps, I move incrementally to my goals. And I think because you have the pressure of the full-time work on you, that's the way that you're going to achieve this. It's achievable to do a tiny little step. Maybe, 1 week you reach out to 2 agents, right? In the meanwhile, another step is follow Writer's Digest, where I'm now contributing editor, and see, the agent feature that they have where they talk about debut agents. So that is added to your list. And then you have right at your fingertips who to contact.
Mhm.
If you're looking for bigger publications, then 1 week, do a deep dive into that column. If it's well that you want to write for, or if it's a specific column, do a deep dive into the column. And so this way you're making steps. You're not going to do it all at once, but
Yeah.
it's going to build to meet your goal.
Yeah, that makes sense because I do feel like, I'll have days where I'm like, oh, I want to write a book. I want to start a newsletter. And then I don't do any of it because it's all too much and you get paralyzed.
And go to the sources like Substack. They actually have, like in the help or the FAQ sections, exactly what to do to start a newsletter. You don't have to go everything alone. There's YouTube help. And I think it's really important to, find places that are going to offer, like this podcast does, actionable advice. I honed my career on service journalism at Woman's World.
Right.
And so that is where I learned it. I'm going to go to your third thing.
Okay.
You said, finally, I'm a generalist at heart, and as my bio details, love writing about random, quirky, funny, and serious things across all verticals. However, the vast majority of my experience is in health, and so most editors and publicists strictly come to me with health stories, which I'm kind of sick of. On the other hand, my resume has been called soft because I do emphasize my lifestyle interests instead of presenting as a serious healthcare reporter. So maybe this is more of an identity crisis, an existential question, but I'm finding that editors want you to have a strong lane, but the one I have a reputation for, I don't really want. Okay. I have gotten asked this a lot, and I actually
Oh,
covered this in Writing That Gets Noticed. So, if you are interested, let's just say, what subjects are you really, really interested in? Psychology? Is it fashion? Is it what is it? What subjects?
yeah, I do like psychology a lot, and I've found a lot of ways to infuse that in a lot of my writing that's not strictly psychology. And I am having success there because one of my most lucrative and regular clients is the APA's magazine. I think, I always say like the stuff that I like to write, I don't know until I come across it and something surprises me. So it's usually
Yeah.
like some weird trend. I mean, one story I've been trying to pitch for a while, which now I'm thinking, doesn't really have a hook. So maybe I need like to set a Google alert, but it's so like random and funny. But I basically am just very intrigued by all these young women that have long, beautiful nails and this trend of like really nice long nails. And I'm just like, how do you type? So I have this story idea of kind of like, and I've talked to some young women that have these nails, and they talk about like how it really boosts their self-image, and they just, even when they feel like really not put together on the inside, having these nails makes them feel, yeah, really like put together on the outside, and it's worth it that when they can't pick up their credit card and they can't really type and all. So it's like things like that. I'm like, that's not really like a category. I guess it's like lifestyle, but kind of culture.
So if you're going to do that, if you're interested in that, I would, first of all, there's Reddit forums for everything. And I would look into if there's some sort of a Reddit forum. Then I would look, I mean, right now, editors are so consumed with what's going on in social media, particularly TikTok. Even the,
Yeah.
I mean, the New York Times is always writing stories that are around TikTok and other influencers. I would see who is a very primary and popular influencer who has the long nails, who's very into promotion, which they are if they have hundreds of thousands of followers, and try to get an interview with somebody like that. That will propel you and elevate you because A, they'll be excited by a serious
Mhm.
journalist covering them for
Mhm.
a prestigious publication, and they'll share it with their followers, and in turn, their followers will become exposed to you. Elevate is a big word for me. It's very important to keep doing things that are going to elevate your status. So I think if there's something quirky, find the person who's at the highest level of wherever doing that. Even, I mean, Barbara Streisand was known for her long nails. I mean, this is a
Right.
celebrity, but you can even reference that because she has a book now. She has a
Yeah.
memoir out. So you can even put that in somewhere because she's in the popular consciousness right now. And you won't necessarily get an interview with her, but again, it kind of adds that extra fillip of attention bringing. And I would also say, I know you're trying to figure out your subjects that you're really interested in, but if your focus is health right now, you can start moving kind of incrementally into other directions. For example, if you want to write about travel and you write about health, you can start pitching health-oriented travel pieces,
Right.
which there's so much of a need for, right? It's like the vaccinations you need to get while traveling, or the health hazards that travelers face, right? And so here you're now combining, you're going to be more than just a health reporter. You're going to be using this element, especially if it's something, if you decide travel is something you want to focus on, that's a way to start imbuing it. You can do it with anything. You can do it with fashion if you're interested in fashion, the health benefits of fast fashion. I'm just throwing that out there, or the materials. And I've written about everything in my career. I have been a generalist and then a specialist. I wrote about health. I was a health expert. I wrote for First for Women. I wrote the fitness column. I was the editor in chief of Body by Jake. I wrote
Mm.
for beauty. I have a beauty book, Beautiful Skin, with a dermatologist. I had the beauty column. I took it over from Bobby Brown when she
Wow.
stopped writing the beauty column for New Body. And so I moved from beauty to becoming editor in chief of publications, but it started with like kind of a health focus. But then when I became a parent, I moved into writing about parenting because that was something that really I was passionate about, and it was new and exciting to me. My daughter's a teenager now. I did write for Shondaland, one of the last personal essays that he posted until now they're just focusing on Shonda Rhimes projects. But I wrote about parenting my daughter, who's a teenager now, with me with hearing loss in midlife. So, there are things that you can still write about, and there are ways to make sure that it's going to be something that's going to give you motivation and energy and drive and support as you go to the next level of your career, being mid-career and having an enormous wealth of information, contacts, and a body of work that you can be proud of. You're just going to continue elevating yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I think that you hit the nail on the head with the travel, because I have a bunch of trips coming up, and they're all probably not ironically like very water based. So there are a lot of boating trips, and I'm a swimmer. It's funny. It's something like I've done every day for most of my life. And I don't think I've ever written about swimming. And I'm like, there's gotta be some sort of, the swimmer travel, like, the best new water activities or something like that. But then I get in my head too, where I'm so used to really needing like some tension or drama or something at stakes for stories. And I'm not that much of a travel magazine reader yet. So part of me is like, does anybody want to just read about like nice pools? Like, but I guess maybe they do. It's just like you don't need drama in a travel story as much, perhaps.
Right, or you can have like, the drama can kind of be in the information also, right? So it's like the oceans you can swim at and have less of a chance of drowning or something like that. And the most extreme swimming events.
Hmm.
I wrote a piece for New Body decades ago called Dangerous Beauty, because I was
Mm.
like, oh, if I write one more facial or spa story. So I wrote Dangerous Beauty about the dangers in certain cosmetics. So you
Mm.
can find that, and it will be more appealing to editors actually. And if you're a triathlete, like you said, you can maybe find
Mm.
the most exciting places to do the triathlete races
Mhm.
because of the newest tourist attraction, right?
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there is ways to imbue drama, however
Mm.
to detail drama. But I think that that's great that you have an interest in travel. And I think you just think not necessarily extreme, but it has to get an editor's attention. So, yes, if you're saying like, what's great about pools, that's not going to get an editor's attention for like, Outside Magazine or Sierra, but it has to have a
Mm.
little bit of something that maybe the conflict is within nature, maybe the conflict is within different elements of the story. Maybe you're talking about swimming and there's some conflagration among the ways that they're looking at diversity. I'm just throwing that out there just off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But you
Like
can
you.
find that angle, and that's where Google Alerts really help, because the way that I identified using Google Alerts is when I would interview for my wealth stories, which I did a lot of for the New York Times in terms of parenting. I would
Mm.
talk to authors, and they were neuroscientists and all different professions, and they'd say, "Oh yeah, I set up every time I write a book, I set up about 20 Google Alerts, so I get the new research, I get anything that's written about the topic that I'm writing about, whether it helps immediately or not, it gets your brain thinking in a multitude of ways, and it can spark other ideas."
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
Do you have any last question for me? This has been so much fun, Anna, and I really hope that I've helped, and I wanted you to keep me posted on your progress.
Yeah. The only other thing I was thinking about is another sort of double-edged sword of where I've only had success landing my own ideas, pitching after having been assigned stories from these editors. And then, that working out. And then I'll turn back around and say, hey, are you interested in my ideas as well? And
Right.
sometimes they say yes. And so that's worked. Or it's been through, at actually a Christmas party, I met a woman who had just been laid off But then she was in a different beat than me, but she, at her old publication, Vox, was like, I think they're actually still taking health pitches. So she connected me to that editor, and I have a story with them coming out. But essentially, I have done what I think we all preach a lot of. You really do have to like know people to be noticed in a lot of ways and get your pitches answered. But I would like to still, and that, so then I need help on the, or maybe this isn't a thing, but like just the cold call, the emails, like all these places that I have pitched, and I just hear nothing because I don't have that extra connection. And I wonder, does anybody?
I mean, I would lead with your strength, and I would always use the valuable real estate, which is in the subject line. I cold pitched the Washington Post before I started writing for them. I cold pitched the New York Times. I didn't know anybody before I started writing for them, but I had good ideas, and I had the subject actually in the subject line of the email, my title. So when I pitched How to Bully-Proof Your Child, which went viral in 2019, I had that in the subject line that I sent to the editor, and she got back to me, Roberta Zeff, who's no longer there, but she got back to me within the day.
Wow.
And wanted more information. Of course, I had a pitch. I knew how to pitch. I had a fully fleshed out pitch that I then was able to send and offer more information. Then I got the assignment, and I help my students do that as well. And I have a whole pitching chapter in the book, a pitch clinic that breaks down pitches and shows why they work and how exactly. So I would use your valuable real estate. I wouldn't be afraid of cold pitching. I would make sure that it's not bogging you down. So maybe just do sporadic. Obviously, lead with I write for all these publications. I am not a big fan of burying that at the bottom of an email. I would lead with that because that gives you instant credibility. So I would say if you have that credibility, go with that credibility.
Cool. There is, so it can be done. You are hope for all of us.
All right. Well, I'm going to have you have a follow-up. And in the meantime, everyone can follow Anna. I'll put her information in the show notes, and it'll be in my blog post at estelleserasmus.com/podcast. And Anna, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm excited to report back on all my success.
Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.